right? So we have to make distinct three things: a traumatic experience or event, a traumatic environment, and trauma. Those are three different things. A traumatic experience is any event where my perception of control is taken away. War, right? I go to war, I can't control if I live or die. Sexual assault, my control of my body is taken away. If I lose a loved one, my control of being in their presence physically is taken away. If I have a massive disease or sickness, my health is taken away, right? So all traumatic experiences, their commonality is perceived lack of control.
What is going on, everybody? Guys, welcome back this week to another amazing, very insightful episode of the Superhuman Life. As always, guys, I'm your host, Frank Rich. And before we get into introducing today's guest, let me just remind you how incredibly grateful and thankful we are to have you here with us. Guys, we have a return. We have a return guest with us here today. It's not very often do we have somebody back on after only 10 episodes. You know, we've had a handful of repeat guests to the show, but usually it comes after maybe a year and a half. Well, this gentleman was on the show just about 6 weeks ago. And just based on the first conversation that he and I had, I just knew that this was somebody that I needed more of in my life, somebody that I connected with. I think we see a lot of things the same way. I think we have a unique perspective on the world collectively. So today we're diving deep into that. But for those of you guys who don't know who we're talking about the return of Larry Yatch. Yes, Larry was on episode 128, where we discuss how to lead your family like a Navy SEAL. But Larry is a 10-year US Navy SEAL turned business consultant who has reverse engineered the behaviors that make the SEALs the most elite and connected teams on the planet. In his book, How Leadership Actually Works, Larry shares his 6-pillar system that companies of any size and in any domain can use for sustainable and easier success. Now, from the largest social op missions in US history to the biggest boardrooms and smallest classrooms, you can follow Larry's journey through that with his book. So guys, make sure to go check out that book, which I have linked down there below. In that first conversation, we really dive deep into what led him to writing this book. But in this conversation, we talk about finding God through trauma, finding truth through trauma. And we unpack a little bit of Larry's experience and journey that he's been on for these past 6 years with unpacking a lot of his PTSD. Now, we'll tell you guys, we get a lot into sharing our views, our perspectives. And this is not a class on theology. This is not a class on religion. This is not a class on God. We're talking about our own opinions and our own perspectives. But guys, I think if you stick around for this conversation, this may be one of the most challenging, insightful, and impactful conversations we've had on this conversation yet. So let's get into it. With none other than Larry Yatch, how Larry found God and found truth through the trauma in his life. Let's get into it. Larry, my brother, welcome back to the Superhuman Life.
Thank you. I don't often do repeat visits, so this is a treat for me, and I'm excited about today's conversation for sure.
Yeah, brother, me too, man. We've had a handful of people returning back. We're 136, 137 episodes in at this point. We've never had anybody that has returned as quickly. You know, a lot of our return guests were like within the first 20. We brought them back around 100. But you, brother, we had you on, less than 10 episodes ago.
I'm telling you, I like to set new standards of performance. I think this is good.
Yeah, well, I know you're all about the standards of performance. So we're definitely leveling up the quality. And we had Annie on recently as well. So this is really going to be, I don't want to say a part 3 because I think today's conversation is going to be a conversation all in of itself. But if you guys haven't done so yet, if you're just catching this, make sure to go back and listen to episode 128 with Larry, and make sure to go back and listen to the episode with Larry's business partner, Annie, because I think both of those will set the tone for today. Obviously, want to go ahead and continue consuming today. Make sure you go back and pick that up. But we mentioned it. So it's been less than 10 episodes. You recently launched a book. Just bring us up to date. You know, the episode aired on May 23rd. So here we are early July. So just what's the last 6 weeks been like for you? How's the book been going? And then we'll just kind of kick it off there.
The book's been going well. Like it was for us, we generally just work with bigger companies, right? With people that are running bigger teams that are performing, growing faster than their confidence to manage their teams. And And that means we have deep connection with few people. And we believe we've uncovered such valuable content that changes lives in such a grand way. To limit that just to bigger companies just felt like a travesty. And having the opportunity to leverage a book, and then we just launched recently a group coaching offer, so a Facebook group where we have the opportunity to have individuals come in and get access to content that companies pay a minimum of 100 grand a year for this content, and being able to have individuals paying, I think it's less than $100 a month to have direct access. So the cool part is like they not only have direct access to me once a month, but Annie once a month, and our third partner Nick, who runs all the operation stuff, once a month. So for us to be able to have access to so many more people and be able to share this content with so many more people has been awesome. Like that's really been I'm sure, I don't know if Annie mentioned or not, but our purpose for the longest time has been permanent and positive change in people's lives, and being able to have that permanent positive change in a lot more people's lives that normally wouldn't have access to has been really gratifying.
Dude, yeah, I mean, at that price point, I mean, it'd be $100 just to have, I mean, $1,000 to have direct access to one of you once a month. But for all three, I know Nick pretty well. We spent a lot of time together while I was with the 7-figure mastermind, which I didn't tell you before. I'm actually returning, which is cool. So, yeah, that's amazing, guys. Is that something that's ongoing? Do you run the group in like?
If I'm the wrong person on sales and marketing. So give me a little bit. I feel a little embarrassed not knowing, but I think going through how leadership actually works, the website for the book is probably the best way to find it. Like that office is going to show up somewhere, but it's and I think we're running a promotion now where it's like the first month or two free, just so people can gain access. But it's like I charge $4,000 a day, and my hourly coaching rate is between $1,500 and $2,000 an hour. And so to spend an hour I spent an hour, and we had a handful of clients on. One of the guys, I spent a half an hour just working on his business, his problems. And for me, it's cool to have access to a lot more people. And for the individuals, they're getting great value. So
the impact that, these people are going to have in their business. It's obviously, I'm thinking this is like, what an incredible funnel for you, obviously for the impact side of things. But as these people start implementing and actioning these things, as their business grows, it's like, hey, Larry, we've now ran into these problems that we didn't even know before. So it just takes them to the next level of what you guys can offer with them as well. Yeah, I don't know if that was the idea.
With any growth comes challenge, right? So with growth comes change. Change then has problems, and those problems are all interpersonal. They're all problems around coordination, being able to fix them. And so being able to do that is really neat, and to be able to see that growth of the individual into greater and greater stuff is really fun to be able to do it.
Yeah, that's incredible. So happy you guys are having that success. And dude, you're probably going to see me in that group, man. Like $100 to be able to talk to you, Annie, and Nick. I could talk to you obviously for free here, but for direct feedback from me, man. So guys, we'll link that down there below. Obviously, go check out the book if you haven't done so yet. Like I said, definitely go check out the first episode with Larry, because we really unpack the leadership side of things. We unpack the book and how you can apply these things to your business, to your family, to your personal life as well. But today's conversation, we really wanted to go specific on the area of trauma, but spirituality. And I want to piggyback off of something that Annie said at the end of the conversation, because she really pointed towards you in terms of the framework. So I'd asked her a question about what role does, it's called a spiritual transformation. And spiritual transformation meaning, or what I'm trying to get to is like, you have to uncover and realize there's a deeper meaning for your life than where you're currently sitting. And I asked her, what role does that play in trauma recovery? She said, she really pointed towards you here. You've come up with, I don't know if it'd be a framework or a concept around this, but all trauma takes us off of the divine path. If I butcher that, please correct me, but can you kind of just go a little bit deper and what you mean there? We'll kind of use that as a launch point for this conversation.
And just to kind of give some framework, I was raised Catholic. So in the Catholic religious tradition, Catholic school, like uniforms, the sisters, nuns running the school from second grade all the way through eighth grade, and then went to an all boys Catholic high school. from all through high school. So I was just from exposure, very deeply ingrained in the Catholic traditions, which did not work for me. Like it pushed me to the point of really being agnostic. Like at the end of that,
Mm.
basically because um, I'd say the foundational piece to me is that I left that Catholic tradition with a very firm understanding that there was me and there was God, right? Two different things. Like we were two separate things. And ultimately, I could see that the church put themselves between me and God. And religion, which to me is very different than spirituality now, was the path to God. And that just didn't make sense to me. I mean, from the very young age. And so there is this disconnect between what I was being taught on a regular basis and what just felt like untruth, right? It didn't feel true that I was separate from God. And that caused me to really uh, go away from that. So for the vast majority of my life, up until really just about 2 years ago, uh, I was an atheist. Like I didn't, I believe there is something out there, something greater than me, but not very clear. And I definitely wasn't a part of it, connected to it, using it on a regular basis. And that was reinforced by my experience in the SEALs. Like I've found generally, so I'm making a generalization here that SEALs kind of fall in one of two categories. You live in an environment where your life is completely at risk all the time and you control very little in reality. Yet, if you were to live in a world where you controlled nothing, you would be in constant fear at all the time and you wouldn't be able to operate. So, guys kind of take one of two approaches. One approach is like absolute faith, right? That yes, I don't control anything, but God is there to look out for me, right? He's got a grand path. That path of it. So, very strong faith. The other path is nothing, right? Like I control everything in my life, and that's it. And uh, outside of that control that I can come in, there is no control. There is nothing, no other forces at work there. So it's kind of this like all or nothing path. And I chose the nothing path of saying, okay, it's just me. I'm going to control what I can control, and I'm going to live with that being enough. And so I found that to be kind of reinforcing to my experience getting out of Catholic school for all those years. And it wasn't up until about 2 years ago, which was kind of right in towards I'd say the last half of my journey through getting through my massive post-traumatic stress, right? All sorts of post-traumatic stress. And altogether about 6 years of deep healing in that area through all sorts of different means. And it's only been this last kind of chunk of it that I really have reconnected to my spirituality or my connection to God. So I just want to kind of lay that out for some framework, right? I came from a history of education in the Catholic traditions, kind of rebelled against all that, went with nothing for a long time, and then now I'd say I've come back into what I believe is a much stronger level of truth of how things work.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate it, and I actually think that's what's going to make today. Hopefully, I'm going to get a lot out of it, but hopefully, because we're coming from such different backgrounds, hopefully the audience is going to get a ton. So I'm the complete opposite, right? Like I grew up with really no discussion of religion, no discussion of God, no discussion of any type of spirituality. You know, when I think back, you know, I definitely remember going to vacation Bible school, but it was like the feeling at the time was like, it's summer. We don't want you at the house because when you're not summer, you're in school. So go to this other school thing because that's what you're supposed to be doing. So we would go there. We do. And it's funny because I've been moving. So I'm kind of like finding some of my like childhood stuff, like find little things, you know, that you did back then, like God always loves Frankie and little things like that. But for me, like that was it in terms of like where it was discussed at home. And I do even remember though, I had a very close friend, one of my best friends, like in elementary school. They were from that Catholic tradition. And there was a couple of times like I stayed over at his house on the weekend and I would get up and I would go through this process. Like you got to put a suit on and it's like a 3-hour ceremony. And it's like, you can't talk and you're a bad person. And then you walk through this line. It's like, none of that made sense to me. But but I didn't understand it at the time, Larry, but I think for me, I think like dedicating and really going deep into personal development and all these self-growth leadership books, like I was searching for answers, right? Like that's what I was going there for. And for me, I think these last 3.5, 4 years of me, when I discuss spirituality, like I'm a Christian, I'm a believer. I don't subscribe to a religion. I have a relationship with Christ. I have a relationship with God. And I think that's what I was hearing you say. Like you were told that you can't have a relationship, that the only way to get to God is through this institution. And obviously that was a red flag there. And that would be a red flag to me. It's like, no, like we're called here, walking with God from the Bible is that relationship. That's how I interpret it and understand that now. So I appreciate you sharing that context. And I think hopefully because we're coming from kind of two different angles and we ended up at the same point, we'll be able to get a lot out of today.
Oh, I agree completely. And like I said, to me, the fundamental problem with what I was taught was that God and I are separate. And now I'm not saying that some priest or brother or nun told me that, but I definitely left through, I had religion class, was it like every day or every other, twice a week for 12 years. I don't think I got it that wrong, right? Like, I don't think I was completely wrong in coming with that understanding. And that to me was the biggest problem. Like, that's where it just didn't resonate. And especially when you think of, God is even in that tradition, right? God is all powerful, omnipresent, omnipotent, right? If he's omnipresent, right? If he is everywhere, how can he not be in me? Right? It's not possible, right? It's impossible those things don't make sense. And as soon my hyper logical brain, as soon as I was like, wait a minute, what you're saying can't be true because you're saying two things that conflict, then I was out. I'm like, then all of this is BS, which I don't. Now, what's interesting now with a new understanding of this and coming at it really, as Annie said, through trauma and understanding things through that experience, looking back at those teachings, I'm like, holy crap, this is what they're saying too, right? So there is a lot of truth to it. The next, I'd say, like this to me, this statement, and I'm going to say this truth to me is one of the things that changed a lot for me. I believe that I am a physical manifestation of God's love on this planet at this point in time.
It's beautiful. And I don't see any holes or gaps in the statement. And even from a Christian, which what I'm going to try to do here, Larry, is as we're discussing these things for the audience's sake, because I know a vast majority of our listeners do come from a Christian worldview, is try to share this through how I'm kind of interpreting this with my understanding of Christianity now, right? Because you said that you can go back based upon where you are at today and understand what you were being taught, but it probably wasn't presented to you from the right perspective to educate a child. I can go back and read and interpret the Bible with 20 years of personal development kind of in me. And I have a great friend. His name is Josh Cachador, and he wrote a book called The Standard, Rediscovering Jesus as a Standard for Masculinity. And where he opens up the book is that the entire self-development industry has swiped from the Bible and pulled Jesus out of a lot of it. And as I'm reading these books, I was like, dude, this is so true. So when I hear you say that, it's like in Genesis, it's like God created man and woman in his image. Yes. So to hear you say you're a manifestation of God's love living in today's world, it's like, okay, boom, right there in Genesis. We're right online with the truth there.
That's how I validated it by the same thing. Going back, oh, wait a minute, I was taught that, right? I was taught that I was created in God's image. That means that and if we link it back to God is omnipresent, omnipotent, then all power I have comes from God. And I can't exist if it weren't for God because God is everywhere. So we've got three different things that all tie that's a fair statement, right? I am a physical.
Yeah, I think it's.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think it's Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Somewhere in that, obviously, send the Holy Spirit down to you. So, I think the problem is like we have to look at the entire book or series of books, the Bible. Sometimes people pull out one scripture. It's like, no, like you need to see this thing as the whole collection for what it is. But what I think will maybe help a lot of people here today is Maybe the journey that you went through. So you mentioned a 6 years of kind of PTSD discovery or PTSD recovery, where you kind of discovered some of these new truths. Can kind of take us through that journey a little bit?
Yeah. So I think what'll be more valuable than the drink, because I can tell the story and the story will be entertaining, but it's not going to really help. I think the core truths that I've learned in the journey will be a lot more useful. And so there's a couple foundations that we have to place. One foundation is that is there something greater than ourselves, like me as a person? Is there something greater than me in this world? The answer has to be yes or no to that. Because some people would say, no, it's just me. There's nothing greater than me. That position you can't defend, right? It is very, very hard to defend the position that there is not something greater than me in this world. And that can be, some people describe that as God. Some people describe that as source or the universe or consciousness. I mean, there's any number of words for it. And I was reading in a book about a year ago, and this statement is, I think, one of the most important ones that I've gotten, was that the word God ensures that we will never truly understand God. The word love ensures that we will never truly understand love. The word consciousness truly ensures that we'll never truly understand consciousness. So the greatest limitation to our understanding of God is trying to just put it into a word, right? If God is infinite and all powerful and omnipresent, then our language is just a means to try and divide it up, and that doesn't work, right? So by simply having that word or that concept, we hold ourselves back from truly understanding all of it. And I think this ties into what you just said, right? One statement from the Bible will limit you from understanding the overall picture if all you do is look at these words, right? We need to look at all of these words to start to have just a minimal grasp of the truth that is God. So that word, I think, is the biggest limitation to it.
Yeah. So one scripture that has just like these last probably a year, I know you and I talked about the importance of language. You brought up in the beginning of our first conversation is the precise or the precision of the language and the words at which we speak. I think it's John 1 opens up with, in the beginning was the word was God, or the word was with God, and the word was God. And for me, that has been a line, a sentence, a scripture that has proven to me how important it is to pay attention to the words that we use and the language that we speak. So with you talking about words here, how would these two tie together? I know it's not a...
So what makes us, I believe I'm a physical manifestation of God's love, or God, right? I'm a physical manifestation of God. That means that I am God. Now I'm going to be very clear in my words. I'm not the God. I'm not a God. But I am God, right? I couldn't exist if it were not true that God is part of me and I am part of God. That's
so your ability to use language, which we're the only species on the planet that has this, created in God's image, both man and woman, is the expression. It's almost confirming what you're saying. The fact that we can use these words are God. We're the only species that has it, shows that we are a physical manifestation. Am I correct?
Right? So I'm a physical manifestation of God, meaning I am God. I'm not the God or a God, right? I am God. A part of me, the part of me that animates me, that gives me consciousness, that allows me to express love and feel love, is God, right? That's part of it. What makes me different than God is the fact that I am distinct. So God is not there. In God is everything. Everything exists in God, right? All powerful, omnipresent. Everything that was, everything that is, everything that will be is God.
Mm-hmm.
What makes me different than that is I am distinct from God, meaning I have a starting point and an ending point, or at least the part of me that is here today, present, human. and part of me is infinite. That's the part of me that is God. At some point that came into this body, and at some point that'll leave, right? Some of us, I would say that's soul, right? The soul is God, right? And that part of me that is God will not be here at some point. And this physical representation will no longer exist. It is in that distinction that we can bring the power of God into the world. He can't do it because he's not distinct, right? We are the mechanism of expressing God's love in this world. He can't, because he is everywhere all the time and all powerful. By being distinct, yet being of God, we can bring that into this world. And where this goes in the tradition is the mystery of the Trinity, right? The Holy Trinity, right? You have three distinct that are all the same, right? We have the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit, right? Three distinct things, yet they are all the same, right? So we are this. I believe that same mystery exists in us, right? We are distinct beings on this planet, yet we are of God. So we are connected, just like the Father and the Son, always connected, always the same, yet distinct. I believe we're then the same. We're the same, right? So that why did Jesus have to become distinct from God? In order to have experiences on this planet to provide us the lesson of how to return to God, right? That's the whole point.
So many different ways we can go here, but like what's really kind of coming to me now is like I'm not a skeptic, but I'm like it's kind of playing in the back of my head right now, like the skeptic's voice. Well, Larry, if we're all God and we're all connected and it's the same and this and that, why do we even need to have this external thing that we even discuss and talk about? So
I can tell you my interpretation of it as to why.
That's what I have here.
Okay, yeah. So if we believe, I do, right? That there is this, and like one of the things I have is that God, love, consciousness, universe, source, to me are all the same thing. All are different ways that we as humans try to separate this thing that is incomprehensible to us into things that we can comprehend, right? So we try to segment, okay, now I can comprehend God. I segment this, I can comprehend love. Segment this, I can comprehend consciousness. Separate this, I can comprehend source or universe, universal power, universal love, right? Because we, as limited beings on this planet, need to try and segment it to understand. But ultimately, they're all the same. I believe it's all the same thing. They're all just different ways that humans try to understand something that we couldn't possibly understand. So in that, if we say there's this one consciousness, this one God, this all-powerful universe, source, love, all of that stuff, let's just call it consciousness for now. In that one consciousness, all exists, right? Everything exists. Everything exists at the same time. Everything that was past, present, and future exists at the same time, right? Again, that comprehension of omnipotent and omnipresent, right? Present in all things and all powerful means everything, right? So all there is everything. What's the one thing that doesn't exist there? There's one thing that doesn't exist in the place that all things exist at the same time.
The one thing that doesn't exist at the place that all things
exist at the same time. This is it's like a riddle. We should have this in a fortune cookie.
Yeah, for real.
Distinction. The one thing that doesn't exist is distinction. If everything exists at the same time, there is nothing that is distinct from another, right? That's important, right? Say my skin's 98 degrees and you put 98-degree temperature near it. Do I feel anything? No, can't feel anything. Right? It is only through a differential that I can feel something. So in a place where everything exists at all times, there is no distinction. With no distinction, there is no experience. You can't have an experience. It's not possible. If you can't have an experience, you can't learn anything. There is no learning to be done. If there's no learning to be done, no progress can be made. None of that's possible, right? So the the ability to be distinct is important in order to have an experience. And that is the gift of life, right? The gift of the fact that I will die, I will cease to exist on this planet, creates a start and a stop of me, or at least the part of me that's human, the part of me that God is God. My soul was here before, has this experience, and will be here after, right? That is infinite. But the part of me that is born and dies creates distinction. That distinction is the only way that I can have any experiences. It's also the only way that I can learn anything and therefore teach anything. In the learning and teaching, I produce connection. I bring God's love into this place and time. And in doing that, I bring another back to God. So now, okay, where have we heard this story before? The story that I just said, right? Was part of the whole, became distinct, had experiences, suffered traumas. In those traumas, brought lessons into this world to bring others back to God. Where have we heard that story before?
That's the story of Jesus.
The story of Jesus. Jesus was God, right? Part of God, became distinct while still being connected, right? The mystery of the Trinity. In that, was able to now have experiences on this planet. In those experiences, because he was still God, knew what was coming. And when was faced with trauma, right? Worst traumas that could be experienced by man, said, I'm here. No, I'm not leaving. Didn't have to be here. Could have left. Said, no, I'm good. This is why I'm here. I'm here to suffer. And in my suffering, to produce lessons, the teaching to show, to illustrate the path back to God. It is only through the traumas of crucifixion that he could have possibly brought the message and the story and the lessons of how to return to God. It's like, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for all of you. So by becoming distinct, we're able to have experiences. In those experiences, we're able to experience traumas that our souls knew about. Jesus is part of God, knew everything, knew what was happening, came down knowing it. When faced with a choice to be here or not, said, I'm here. No, this is it. Chose those traumas to be able to bring love into the world, which produces God's love into the world in practice, in order to produce the ability for others to return to God. What do we do in life? Same exact thing. Our whole experience in life was our soul knew everything, part of everything. Said, I want that one. I want to go to war and get blown up, right? I want to go through all of those issues so that someday I can be on a podcast with you. My soul's like, I want to be on a podcast with Frank so that I can bring the message of salvation to other people. Like, I'm in. Put me in for that. I'm in, coach. Now, our souls, the one thing, so in a place where everything exists all the time, what's the one thing that couldn't understand would be not having access to all that. So our souls, I think, were surprised. They show up and they're like, shit, I don't remember all this. What happened? Like, all of a sudden, it's like, I don't remember anything. And it needs to be that way because we now have distinction, right? We are all eternally connected to God, but we are now distinct, which gives us the opportunity to experience our trauma. So I believe that our soul picks every trauma that you ever go through in your entire life. Your soul picked that before it jumped into this. And it did it, giving you the opportunity, but not the requirement, right? Jesus had a choice. He didn't have to die. He chose to, so that he could bring that lesson. Same thing for us. We don't have to learn from our traumas. We don't have to bring God's light into the world through those. We can bring more darkness and separation if we choose to, free will. Our soul some souls aren't ready to learn. They aren't ready to bring God's light into the world through love and connection. The lessons, I believe that our most powerful lessons come through our traumas, right? That our soul picked. And then but it gives every trauma we experience is an opportunity for us to bring a lesson of salvation into the world, a lesson to another to bring them closer to light. So that's a long answer to your question of, well, if we're all part of the whole, why would we ever become distinct?
No, that's so, dude. I knew today was going to be amazing. I just knew it. Are we still on the first lesson? Because we talked about you had all these lessons. So that is,
There's a couple. I threw a couple in there, but we got some of this is a big one, right? There's a lot of big ones here, and that if you look at other religious traditions, that story of whole separation, trauma, opportunity for lesson to bring more connection into the world, that story repeats itself in most religious teachings.
well, I think Buddha summed it up in one sentence, right? Life is suffering. In that entire journey that you were explaining, like the core piece of it was we need that experience, we need that trauma, we need that suffering, because that is what is going to be the catalyst for us then going sharing our experience, sharing the love of God with the rest of the world. So, yeah, no matter what worldview, religion, philosophy you subscribe to, there's some truth in here. What has been like your exploration of other world religions? I know you mentioned you have a Catholic upbringing background,
I would say
but in this
small.
journey,
I'm generally interested in understanding how things work. Like that's if I want to know how things work. So I'd say I have, by no means have I studied a lot. And that's where I always thought like my path back to God was going to be, I always thought through studying the other religions and finding one that fit. And what I've realized is I believe religion was created by man to put themselves to put man in between me and God, which gives them a place of power. And so I don't think religion is bad. I think religion is a mechanism of humans trying to help other humans back to God, but in so putting a barricade between me and God, right? So I think ultimately the study of other religions now at this point has been for me to validate the truths that I've been identifying through my journey through the traumas of understanding that. And what we find is, or what I find is here's another kind of critical lesson is that trauma just takes you out of the present moment, right? So we have to make distinct three things: a traumatic experience or event, a traumatic environment, and trauma. Those are three different things. A traumatic experience is any event where my perception of control is taken away. War, right? I go to war, I can't control if I live or die. Sexual assault, my control of my body is taken away. If I lose a loved one, my control of being in their presence physically is taken away. If I have a massive disease or sickness, my health is taken away, right? So all traumatic experiences, their commonality is perceived lack of control. So as soon as control is taken away, I start to experience trauma. I always experience trauma in some sort of environment, right? And that becomes the traumatic environment. If I die in the traumatic event, then I don't experience trauma. I'm dead. Trauma only comes through survival, right? So if I have a traumatic experience in a certain environment and I survive, then I have trauma. Trauma is the lesson that we took from survival. Trauma is merely a lesson. Now, most of the time when we get stuck in that traumatic lesson, it keeps us in the past of when it happened or the future of it happening again, which takes us out of this present moment. And God only exists in the present moment. The more present we are, and the more present we are holistically, our body, mind, soul, energy, that's how we experience God. And I believe that heaven is ultimate presence, right? If I was able to be 100% present in this moment in every part of my mind, body, energy, soul, emotional state, I would be in heaven. I would cease to exist on this planet anymore. Trauma's job is to push us off center from that present moment, right? I experience trauma and I get pushed off center. I get pushed off center into the fear of it happening again, or the anxiety, the anxiety that comes from the experience of it. It is only in that separation from the present moment that we experience a separation from self, a separation from God, and therefore a separation from others. in that separation, we can do bad. We can do evil. In the present moment, in the present moment of absolute presence, love, God, it's impossible to do any wrong. You can't.
Now, I was going to say, are we doing evil consciously or unconsciously at that point? Like if the trauma has taken us off centered with God, off of our divine path. Let's say we're no longer walking with God at that point. Are we acting in evil knowingly, or are we acting in evil unknowingly because we're off the center
So
of our
the answer is
of our
going to
path?
be both. Yes, and right. Like so, a combination.
As I was phrasing it, I was like,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a combination, right?
I
Sometimes it's
realized
a conscious
yeah.
choice for defense, right? Because fear only exists in an absence of love. If I'm in the present moment, there's absolute infinite love available to me all the time through my connection with God. In that, I can't feel fear, right? I can't feel fear and love at the same time, right? Where there's fear, there's no love. Where there's love, there's no fear, right? I can't be in, it's one or the other. If I live in fear, then I have to defend. If I have to defend, I can hurt, right? I can do wrong. So it is only being off center or off of God's path, out of the centered point of absolute love and connection, that I can do anything wrong. Now, this is the silly part. In this moment, the furthest I get, the deeper my trauma, the further I get pushed off of the center. You would argue the further I am away from God. But God is omnipotent and omnipresent. So God still exists in my farthest point away, where I feel the farthest away. God still exists as much there as he does when I'm centered. I trick myself into thinking that I am alone, because I can't be alone, right? I can't be separate from myself. I trick myself. I can't live in the past because the past doesn't exist. The past only exists in my mind in this moment. The future only exists in my mind in this moment. All I have is this moment. So I pretend that I'm in the past. I pretend that I'm in the future. I pretend that I'm alone. I pretend that I'm not connected to myself, to God, to others. And in that pretending, in those lies that I tell myself, I do bad things. I can do bad things.
I love the way you said, true presence, the ultimate presence would be heaven. Like I've said multiple times, this takes me back to like early stages, like early months of my recovery and this journey that I've been on for 3.5 years now. I threw a post out one morning. Like I was just in a like ultimate sense of just presence and focus and just feeling like I was just in heaven almost here on earth. And it was like, for me at that point, it's like, presence was the ultimate flow state. And that's how I've kind of interpreted. I love the way you phrase that as well though. But as you're talking about this trauma off-centered was still with God, I'd be curious how you kind of interpret Israel, right? Israel is wrestling with God. If somebody is having a constant struggle, whether it's an internal struggle or they're angry at God, like, God, he did this to me again. What would you kind of say there to that individual? Like from I don't want to say a coaching standpoint, but how do you interpret like a person that's angry at God, and then and what would be the words to help them there? And it sounds like they've got some trauma that they need to work through.
I am either a physical manifestation of God or I'm not. Right. So if that person can get to the place of understanding that they are a physical manifestation of God, then I'm mad at myself. Okay. Like, be mad at yourself, right? If I am God, right, a part of me is, then a part of me knew that this bad thing was going to happen to me. It had to have, because God is all knowing and all powerful. So you chose this journey, this struggle. You could be mad at yourself for picking this one. Okay. Like, be mad. Now get over it. Like, you picked it. It is impossible for us to be a victim to anything if we are a physical manifestation of God.
So I guess that would be the challenge then for most people. And I appreciate you having this conversation. I know this isn't normally what you do on podcasts, but this is like, I'm getting so much out of this. How how have you had people interpret? Like, have you had pushback on that? I know this is not what you're teaching. This is your beliefs and how you see things.
Another piece, like a piece of the journey. Like I'll go back to your original question. What's the journey through this? So, I was a SEAL, experienced a bunch of trauma, both in the SEALs and in being injured and in some pretty bad, medical situations for a chunk of time. And that caused a bunch of trauma. And ultimately that trauma started when I was very young and just got bigger, right? Like it's the same story over and over again that I recreated. Then 10 years of focusing on business, ignoring the trauma, which is my life got worse and worse and worse until finally got to a point of saying, okay, it's time to fix this, because no amount of success or things I buy make any difference. I'm still in a miserable state. In that, I started working through my trauma, and as my brain does, as I started to experience healing in that, I started to see patterns, and in those patterns, I started to see an opportunity to help others. Right, like, oh wow, this is how this stuff works. And so, one of the services that we do, which is very small, very select, is I found that the biggest limitation for growth of a structurally sound company are the unresolved traumas of the CEO. So, and because our space was business, right? But you could say that the biggest limitation to your personal growth, your personal experience of success in your life, are your unresolved traumas. Because the purpose of trauma is to keep you in the past or the present, or the future, right? Not to be present. And we can never make a good decision when we are not present. We are not on, as you say, God's path, in the center of God's love. We can't make good choices there. So all the limitations that you have in life are based on the fact that you are not centered, you are not present, you're not living in truth. You're living in lies that you tell yourself to keep yourself safe. So we started treating CEOs with the same techniques I developed to help combat veterans. And that didn't make sense, right? These CEOs, none of them had combat experience, yet I was using the same tools and techniques I was using with combat veterans with them. Now, if you understand that the root of trauma is perceived lack of control, entrepreneurship is nothing but traumatizing, because you don't control shit. Like, it's hard, everything, right? You have all the responsibility, all the risk, and none of the control. That's just like being a SEAL. Like, that's what it was like going into battle. So when we started to apply these combat techniques of trauma mitigation to CEOs, we saw explosive growth. So I've now got 130 reps of doing this with some huge names, right? People doing it, and big companies. And what I found with this was that every trauma, every strategy that someone makes up, because the trauma is just a lesson, right? We have traumatic experience, traumatic event, and trauma. Trauma is the lesson. The lessons serve us in the traumatic environment. So when I'm in war, the lessons I learned in war worked really well. When I'm trying to have a healthy, happy relationship with my family, the lessons from war don't work well. And that's where we have stress, right? When I use the lesson from the past in the present environment that's different, I create stress. That's post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress is living in the untruth of your past lessons, right? We're applying something that worked well before, but doesn't work well anymore. Yet that lesson kept us alive. So it's really hard to give it up, right? It's very difficult. Now, what's crazy about this is, and this is what I call it, truth through trauma, right? I got to God through trauma. Of course, I picked the hardest way possible. That's, right in line with everything else I do. So I'm not surprised. But what blew me away is 130 out of 130 times, someone's individual experience, right? So my individual experience in war, Bob's individual experience being abused by his father when he was 3, right? 2 very different experiences. Those experiences produce lessons, right? Like, I learned the lesson that everything's going to go to crap, that everyone's going to get hurt, and it's all my fault. Like, as a SEAL, that worked really well. When I lived in that truth, it worked really well. Bob might learn that I have no value. I'm broken. That's why my dad touched me. Right. So he learns those lessons. Our experiences are very different. Our lessons are very different. The inverse of our lesson points to God's truth. That blows me away. So let me pull up an example to make this real, because this is where I found God. Literally, from being completely separate to absolutely finding God, because this can't happen any other way. So 130 reps, I'm going to pick a random one. So this is a random thing of it. So this particular guy, just giving some background, I'm not going to give details, but some things. Both of his parents died while he was young. He was physically and sexually abused by his dad, emotionally abused by his mom, blamed him, and then both of them died before he could make any sort of repair with that. So, like, pretty serious stuff. What did he make up? So this is his untruths. Those that I needed the most to love me were too damaged to feel love. Because of that damage, they hurt me to protect themselves. Being hurt by those that should love me proves that I'm unlovable. Right? That's his story. And everything in his life has to fit in that story, because that story kept him alive. Now, that's made him an unbelievable salesperson. Like, this guy crushes it in sales because he knows he's completely disconnected from any emotional connection, yet he has to constantly prove his worth by being of value to people. So he doesn't feel anyone's emotions, yet he has a constant drive to have them feel that he's of value. So he can sell because he doesn't get caught up in the emotional side of things. And he can sell because he always has to produce value. So it worked really well for him. But in that same thing, he has never had a relationship where he's felt love, ever, because he is unlovable. And how many times do you think in this man's life did someone stand there loving him and he couldn't have that be true? He had to get rid of the relationship. He had to do something to break it, because he knows to the core of his being that I am unlovable. Right? He knows it. And if he was to actually allow the possibility to someone to love him, then his whole strategy for defense that has served him for 35, 40 years would go apart.
His entire worldview is
can't have a relationship,
underneath him.
That lasted more than a couple months. And there are people that love the hell out of this guy. I know them. He can't feel it. It's impossible because his world falls apart. So that's untrue. Right? So what's amazing about that is I'm going to read it again. Those that I needed the most to love me were too damaged to feel love. Because of that damage, they hurt me to protect themselves. Being hurt by those that should love me proves that I am unlovable. His unique experiences produced a story that, I don't know, for me, I resonate with some of that. Do you resonate with any of that?
I don't, man. As I'm hearing that, it's almost like the sentences don't even line up to a coherent thought for me. Like, I have a hard time understanding how just because somebody else doesn't love you, how does that have any impact on who you are?
That's what's amazing to me, right? Unique experience produced a story that I get some, because I definitely have some of that unlovable piece to it. Like, I might be broken. Like, that's part of my messed up self. You don't have any of that. Therefore, this doesn't resonate at all. So this is where it gets amazing, right? Unique experience, only his. These untruths that I kind of get, you don't, right? Kind of universal. Now, what we do is identify the inverse of that. So if that's the untrue story, what's the true story? So let me read that.
Yeah.
It is through my pain that I was given the gift of learning. It is through my learning that I was given the gift of self-love. It is through my love of self that I'm given the gift of the love of others. That's universally true. Like, that's God's truth. Like there is no one that doesn't apply through. Everyone's experienced pain, and it is only through our pain that we can learn. Like if we don't have any pain, we can't learn.
Now, knowing all of this, Lear, I hope you don't mind me asking you kind of a personal question around parenting and fathering. And you and Annie have children together. You don't have to share the dynamics of how you guys are doing all that, but knowing the role that how you were brought up in the Catholic Church impacted how you saw things, and then going back now and understanding this and seeing all the truths in there, how has this either changed or impacted the way that you're parenting your kids? Because in one essence, like they need these experiences, they need these traumas, but you want to protect them, right? Because they're your babies. So how are you kind of like wrestling and going through
it was
raising children?
I would say the biggest learning point was that my responsibility as a parent changed in this understanding. So it is only through our traumas that we are exposed to the truth of God that we've been brought into this planet to reveal. Like that's a dense statement, but an important one. It is only through our traumas that we are given the opportunity to bring God's truth into this world, which is why we were brought here, right? Like that's an important concept. I used to believe that my job as a parent was to make sure that my children didn't experience trauma. That's impossible. Like it is an impossible thing. No matter what I do, my pure action of trying to hyper protect them will be traumatic because I take away their perception of self-control, right? They have no control of their environment because I dictate everything to keep them safe. That would be traumatizing. So it is impossible. It's not my role to isolate my children from trauma. My role is to teach them how to get back to God once they're traumatized. That's my job. My job is to get them back to the truth that is God, the truth that is love, the truth that is source, the truth that is the universe, to help guide them to be the light that attracts them back to that center. That's my job. That's the biggest thing I learned.
That's so powerful. And obviously you're not waiting for the trauma to bring them back. This is done on the front end side of things, an expression of how you love them. And I don't know, are you having conversations with them about this thing? How old are you?
8
by the way,
and
if you don't
5.
mind me asking. Okay.
Yeah, and so in this point, I believe that my job is to be a lighthouse, right? So my job is to shine the light of God and truth as bright as I can in my particular frequency and wavelength, which is a unique one. And so my job is to continue to be an example of healing for them and an example of knowing that truth, I call it truth with a capital T, right? A truth that is universal for all humans. That's God's truth is expressed on a daily basis. And then letting them feel confident that when they experience hardships, trauma, struggle, that there's always the light, like a lighthouse. My job is to show them where safe harbor is. They may go way far away. I can't control that. But for them, always knowing that there is a light at that center and all they have to do is go towards the light. And the other thing is letting go of what happens. Like their souls were decided to come into this experience, this particular time, to have some experience. I don't know what that is. And some souls don't want to learn, right? They aren't here to heal and learn and bring God's light into the world at the same level as others. That's okay. It's not my job to determine that. My job is to give them the opportunity to have the tools. If they want to use them, it's up to them.
Incredible. I want to ask you one last question here. Kind of, I framed it at the beginning, kind of this Christian perspective that I wanted to kind of, speak everything through today, or at least interview through kind of this lens. So just curious, like your interpretation, perception of, let's call it Satan or an enemy in this particular view. Is there an element of that? And if so, like expand on your concept.
So I've been tackling this one for the last couple months because this was another one that was bothering me. And so I got some real thoughts on this. I do not believe that evil exists.
To what extent though? Because sorry to challenge here. Like at the beginning, you said when you're off centered, you can go do evil. So if you're doing evil, you're going to have to separate it from the act of evil and then the existence of a real evil.
why I believe that there is no God is all powerful and all present, right? Omnipotent, omnipresent. Therefore, say there was Satan, then Satan is God. Has to be, because God's omnipotent and omnipresent.
Mm.
So I look at this, the way I understand this is through the perspective of light and dark. So light cannot exist without dark. I need both. If there's only light, there'd be no experience of light, right? It goes right back to our thing of distinction. So light can only exist with dark. Dark is an absence of light, right? It's an emptiness. How much power, how much energy, how much effort does light have to put into getting rid of dark? None. Dark has no power over light at all. It can't. Dark can't be there except for in the absence of the light. As soon as light is where dark is, there's no more dark. Light doesn't have to work to get rid of dark. Dark can't fight light. Can't do it. That's my same concept for good and evil. There is only love. Love can't exist without the absence of love, fear or darkness. But the darkness has no power over the light. Can't. Anywhere there's love, there is no more dark. Anywhere there is God, there is no evil. God exists everywhere. There can't be evil. What happens is humans trick ourselves into believing that I am not, God isn't with me. And in doing that, I can do things that bring dark into the world. But as soon as the light shines, all the dark goes away. Because there's this traditional, I think, where I think is false, there's this understanding of light versus dark. There is no light versus dark. The light it can't fight. The dark can't fight the light.
Yeah.
It can't do it. There is no fight. All there is a perceived absence. In a perceived absence, I can do things that hurt other people. Yet this is where it gets really tricky. There is that person, that soul that is doing bad. That soul was all powerful and all knowing at some point in consciousness. I think those souls are the most courageous because they came in saying, I'm willing to play the role of dark so that there can be light. That means that I'm not a victim to someone that does something wrong. They aren't attacking me. They are providing me with the opportunity to bring God's light into the world.
Wow.
And their soul chose that path. Talk about a courageous soul. It's easy to pick. I'm the saint. Like I'm the one that just brings light everywhere. That soul's the easiest one. That's got the easiest job. You get to be in God's light all the time. This soul's like, yeah, I'm going to pick the hard one. I'm going to be the dark so that light can exist. Yeah. Gives me chills thinking about it. There is no evil.
Guys, if you don't have things to think about, speaking to the listeners here, if you don't have things to think about, questions to ponder, if this hasn't challenged you, if this hasn't inspired you to go deeper on your beliefs, on how you see things, you got to go back and listen to it again.
Because 5 minutes. take up 5 minutes.
Yeah. Larry, man, I want to acknowledge you again. You know, you shared something on the first conversation that had quite a bit of positive feedback. I just want to acknowledge you and commend you for sharing that, because I think it's obviously you're a courageous man. I mean, your resume demonstrates that, but I do want to let you know that there was quite a bit of response when you shared your Asperger's and just how you've kind of been processing. I know you shared some things there you hadn't shared previously, so I want to acknowledge you there, and I just want to acknowledge you once again for coming on here today. You know, we're not speaking here in terms of experts. Here, this wasn't a class on relationship, religion, God, theology, none of that. This was a conversation with two men that are trying to understand themselves a little bit deeper, trying to understand the way that they see the world, and hopefully provide value to others to maybe ask some of the difficult questions that we've asked ourselves over these years. So definitely want to acknowledge you here today for this conversation, and what, like I said, what you shared on the first one, because we had a lot of feedback around that. I don't have a great way to end this. Usually there's like an action step, go download this, opt into the book. Obviously, we want to get people to go check out how leadership actually works. We'll link down the book there below. But if you can, man, is there just maybe a takeaway, one final thought here for the audience? I'm not going to ask you what your thoughts on Superhuman life, because we asked that question, 6 weeks ago. So yeah, just kind of, last minute takeaway or final thoughts from you, Larry, and we'll close out.
I would say two pieces. One piece is if you want to focus on one thing, focus on this. I am a physical manifestation of God's love on this planet at this point in time. If you just take that statement and say, what does that mean to you? Like, and what implications does that have? Where have you been acting in untruth to that statement? Where have you been acting in truth in that statement? Like, that's a work. Like, I had one of my clients spend 1 year every day reflecting on that. Every morning he'd get up and reflect on that one thing for a year. And after a year, he's like, I think I kind of got it. So that's one. The other piece is understanding, like really getting to the point where you accept it as true. This would be a challenge. Accept it as true that if you believe, like I think everyone on here believes that there's a part of them that is God or of God or connected to God, right? That part of you picked this life fully knowing what it was going to be. Right, that part of you that is a soul, that is God, the I am part of you, knew exactly what you were going to experience for your entire life. If that means that you are not a victim to anything that has ever occurred to you in your life, you picked it. What does that mean for you? Right, that's another one. Like those two things, you could spend a big old chunk of time just working on those two things. And the intent, when I say working on them, make them true. Right? How do you make that so that is absolute? Like, to me, it's absolutely true. I am a physical manifestation of God's love at this point in time and on this planet. And my soul chose every experience that I've had, all my negative, all my positive. Like I picked this. This is of my creation, the part of me that is God. I'm not a victim to anything. Absolutely true. Those would be my two challenges.
Yeah, guys. And I think that runs true with, the mission of this podcast. We end every single episode with, what defines a superhuman life. You're here for a purpose, and it's your job and intent to show up every single day and bring that purpose to the world for the service of good through the actions in the intent at which you live. So yeah, challenging every single one, challenging myself here. Probably question 2 is the one that I'm going to spend more time around. I think I got the first one pretty good. There's probably some things I still need to kind of explore there, but brother Larry, this was so fire, guys. Like I said, if you didn't get questions, if you didn't get challenges, if you don't have thoughts to think about and ponder on how you're seeing things and how you're showing up, guys, you didn't pay attention. So for those of you today, we appreciate you. Guys, we're 3 years into this thing. We just celebrated the 3-year mark, and we've seen tremendous growth, and it's all because of you. So if you want to continue to support us, do us in one or two ways. Make sure to leave us a 5-star rating or written review. But probably more important here than any other time, if there's somebody in your life that is maybe wrestling with some things, if they're struggling with their relationship with God, if they're struggling with even the thoughts of, is there something greater out there than just us? Do us a favor, but do them the blessing of sharing this conversation with them. But for the return of Larry Yatch, Frank Rich, guys, we love you, and we'll see you next week.